A Manousso Musing with Cindy Hyde of HoustonPrenupAttorney.com. Part 2, Postnups. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Orłowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland, also qualified as Florida Supreme Court family mediator.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso. I'm a trainer, mediator, and arbitrator, and I am based out of Houston, Texas, and Newport, Rhode Island. And I am just delighted today to have with us some fresh information by Cindy Hyde on our Manousso Musing to talk about post-nuptial agreements. And I know there's always a lot of confusion, or people think they're going to use a prenup or any type of a contract they can put their hands on when life isn't going well in a marriage. The relationship, all of a sudden they realize the socks didn't smell as good on the feet after the first year, and they start seeing a lot of the defects. And I've heard people say, well, I got to get a postnuptial agreement now. Or maybe somebody's finances change. You married a person who had an average income, and all of a sudden they won the lottery, and the money talks, and people get excited. So, Cindy, you're an attorney, and you are extremely well known in the market as a prenuptial attorney or a postnuptial attorney. I know you also mediate and arbitrate. You've had a wonderful career. So we very, very much appreciate you sharing this information today. But given the dynamics of relationships, could you just give a very small framework of expectations in a prenup, very short, but how that dynamic is so different in a postnuptial? What does a postnuptial mean, and how does it differ from being a prenup, please?
You bet. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all, and I'm happy to talk about the most favorite subject in family law that I've encountered since all the years of doing what I do. A prenuptial agreement is a contract. It's a marriage contract that you negotiate, and that in that you decide what the financial relationship of your marriage will look like instead of the laws of the state where you live. So you have, full control over how you want to arrange your estate plan and lay out the future of your income and expenses, and who's paying for what, and who will own what in the event of divorce or death. Now, a postnuptial agreement is just that. It's postnuptial. It's a contract that you do after marriage. And sometimes someone will come to my office just, maybe a couple of weeks before they get married, and they think, oh, we need to do a prenup. And there's just really not time to handle all the issues that need to be addressed in a marriage contract. And so they'll consider doing a postnuptial agreement, possibly shortly after marriage. Or the other situation is when someone has been married a long time and some issues come up, and I'm happy to go through those possibilities. A few of those possibilities for why you would entertain a postnuptial agreement, why you would change the parameters of what the state otherwise says about your marriage. So let me just mention a few of those to start with. You can be looking at an estate plan. So you're going to determine in advance how your wealth and your property would be divided and distributed in the event of death or divorce. And I also want to mention that anytime you're going to do a postnuptial agreement or a prenuptial agreement, you should also be working at least afterwards with a trust, wills, and estates lawyer. So you have both your will and your prenup and your postnup compatible instruments. You don't want to have a conflict there between those two, because otherwise there'll be a problem when one of you passes. You might want to modify an existing prenuptial agreement also of the terms that you originally had thought about or thought were going to go in one way, and then after marriage sometime down the road you want to change that. So anytime you have a prenup, it can always be modified, but it has to be done with the same formality as that you do when it was originally created. The two of you just can't agree, okay, we're going to do something different. Well, that's fine, but it needs to go through the same process through a lawyer's office where you potentially rescind some of those provisions, and then you draft something else. You might want to provide for alimony or spousal support or maintenance in the event of divorce that might not have been addressed either in a prenup or even thought about when you got married. There might be a business interest from that has begun after marriage, and you want to partition part of that community property in the state of Texas that would be, maybe set aside for a business, or you're setting aside, you're creating a separate property interest that was not otherwise there when you got married. It was community, and you're creating separate property. So with respect to how this might apply to mediation, however, it's a postnuptial agreement is a great way to sort out issues that might come up in a divorce in advance, and then you're going to reduce the tension between spouses if in fact that's what happens. And that's where you guys come in and are so effective in helping negotiate a postnuptial agreement.
But when you are already in this situation, so what's the percentage, or how does it work? Do people that come to you to do the postnup, do they already have a prenup? Or someone would say, but I already have a prenup. Why do I need to do a postnup? So how does it work? What's the then interrelationship between the two?
Well, it's not, frankly, very usual when I see someone who comes to the office and wants to draft a postnuptial and they have a prenup. Usually it's, we didn't do a prenup and now we want to handle things in the postnup. Now, one key issue, and you guys will appreciate this, when you're already married, you've lost a big part of your negotiating ability, because if you're going to come to the table and talk about something that you really have no leverage on. I mean, what if one of the parties brings up an issue they absolutely are adamant about, and the other person says, well, no, what are you going to do? Get a divorce? I mean, you really, it's not nearly the same sort of situation with respect to negotiating how your financial arrangements will look. Now, there's one exception, maybe if couples discussed certain issues before they got married, and then it's a matter of just executing their intentions afterwards, but that's not always the case. So if you've got to have any play there on both sides, I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge to do that after you've already been married. So I hope I answered your question.
It was a good question. Good answer. Good answer.
Yes.
Mac?
Similar to when we were talking about the prenups, and I asked about the mechanics of the prenups. What are the mechanics of the postnup? The things that typically happen structure-wise under the law, the requirements.
That's a great question. And like a prenuptial agreement, there's certain formalities that you have to go through. I mean, it's a contract, and you are changing what the Texas Family Code, in my case here in Texas, would otherwise say about your marriage. So the first thing, just like a prenuptial agreement, you must also sign what we call a waiver of disclosure, a waiver with respect to the financials. Then you sort out what it is you want to look differently about your financial issues. now in Texas, again, it's a little different than in other states because we're a community property state. So you can go from community property to separate, but not the other way around. There are other ways of handling those sorts of issues. And then, both parties need to be represented. Absolutely, you need two lawyers, so both parties understand exactly what they're doing and what they're signing. I also like to take another step and do what I call a signature ceremony on Zoom or some other sort of media where it is recorded and very clear. Everyone knows what they're signing, and there's no question that that's the case.
Cindy, how do you prevent fraud? Sometimes when, again, financial information, and especially, I think I would expect that the profile of the person who comes to you for a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement are people who have money. I can't imagine low-level salaried people being as concerned with issues of finance that might come up in the marriage if it's not a large number. So you're probably looking at high-end people, would you not be? And with that being said, these are often very savvy business people. What assurances would people have in the prenup or in the postnup to make sure that they are not having any hidden Swiss accounts, or I don't know where else people put them offshore anymore, but obviously I'm not in that bracket to be concerned. But could you talk to that a little bit? How could Bambi be assured that her sugar daddy is going to put all his nickels on the plate?
Another great question, and hidden assets are a whole nother topic, frankly. However, in a prenuptial situation, if there is a very high income or there are substantial assets, I mean, typically there are other types of provisions or arrangements that are made financially that say, all right, this is what is on the table. I'm not going to otherwise give you 50% of everything that I earn after marriage, because maybe that would just be an incredible windfall that would honestly might be very inappropriate anyway. So you have this sort of exchange. Maybe there's X amount of dollars for each year of marriage, or there's sort of a maybe there's a home involved, or cars, or whatever. There's all sorts of possibilities. Maintenance for so many years in lieu of disclosing all of these other assets. Now, I don't like to draft a contract, whether it's a prenup or a postnup, where everything is not disclosed. I think it's a very sort of risky situation, because first of all, how can you negotiate a contract if you don't have everything on the table? I mean, it's like you're doing this with one eye closed. You have to know what it is you're dealing with. You also need to know the less moneyed spouse, or the less moneyed potential spouse, who you're marrying and what their financial profile really is. It's a red flag to me when that's not willing to be put on the table. And I don't like to do those sort of contracts. And I have in the past even withdrawn as counsel, because they just don't feel right to me. I don't like, how can I advise someone how to negotiate what they're giving up if they don't even know? You have, and it's part of a marriage. Let's be candid about your finances. I think it's important. Not everyone feels that way, but I do. So this issue of hidden assets or potential fraud, one of the ways it is handled is, through the waiver of disclosure, because in both cases, both parties sign a waiver that says basically, hey, this is what I have disclosed to you. I've made my best effort. This is a fair and reasonable, or it's an accurate disclosure. And then beyond that, that person has no right of knowing anything else, basically, because you're making your deal there at the table, and that's it. Going forward, none of your beeswax, basically.
So tell us, please, how long does it take, and how really likely it is, and with which moment of the marriage, or actually of the breakup of the marriage, that people will want to come to your office and do that. When I mean, me and Mac and probably Dr. Manousso, when we meet it. When we encounter this sort of problem, we usually encounter them in mediation as a part of the overall dispute over the breakup of the marriage. So we have children as a part of MSA, right? Mediated settlement agreement, right? But how often is it that people really come just for that to you? Or are they already divorcing when they come? Well, are they considering a divorce? Or is it rather a way to solve their marriage and continue upon the new conditions that they would agree with you?
Well, I think, if someone is on the road to divorce, they probably are not going to go through that exercise of a postnuptial agreement. That typically happens a lot earlier in their marriage in the hopes of maybe trying to, in the meantime, work something out. But it's been my experience that if someone is coming to my office to draft a postnup because they're concerned about the success of their marriage, they're probably on that path anyway. That's just my perspective. So once in Texas, you're either married or you're getting a divorce. There is no such thing as a formal separation. You can be separated, but you're still married. You can be in the process of divorce, and you have temporary orders regarding how you're sorting out your financial affairs until your divorce is final. But there's not, like in other states in the country, there's not something called a formal separation agreement. It's just, you stepped on the escalator or you haven't. So that's how it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mac,
So-
did you have a question?
Yeah. So, Cindy, what are some? You had mentioned public policy as, I guess, the determining factor you got to consider when you're going to decide what's going to go into the prenup. You can't agree on things that is against the state's policy. What about in a postnup? Are there things that you can't put into your postnup because of state law?
Well, I think you go to issues of public policy. Certainly, nothing that's criminal, nothing that would fly in the face of any, legal discussion. And I think probably, anything that's just outside the boundaries of normal decency for most people are not going to be enforceable. There's a big difference between, okay, we could throw in a clause that, well, I don't want my spouse to gain any more than 20 pounds versus something that's really unethical or illegal. So, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, it does. I'm just always curious about what people try to put into postnups or prenups, and then you say you can't do that.
Uh-huh.
Well, could you mention a few things that have been maybe a surprise to you, or things that you think are routine that should be in a prenup or a postnup, and to make it clear? And one of the things that I think is, what are some of the turn-on points that would inspire the postnup? It's a big question. I've got 4 parts to it there for you. But what would inspire the postnup? What were some of the items, or what were some things that you've seen that have contributed to the postnups that you found surprising, or talking points that you think are routine or expected?
Okay, well, let me use an example. I think that might be a good place to start. Let's say you have a couple that has a disparate income. And after marriage, and again, we're speaking about Texas law, in a community property state, one of the parties decides, I really want to keep my income separate, and I'd like to contribute to my retirement accounts with the income that I make, and I don't really want to share that with my spouse. Then that would be an ideal situation for a postnuptial agreement. So the couple would sign the agreement to say, we have decided to not create community property or create any more community property or even back up from there. And then we partition their savings accounts or their checking accounts or potentially even retirement accounts. I mean, that's a little more complicated, but you know, the finances are usually the big issue, more so than other, more personal issues that may or may not, like I said, be against public policy and simply not enforceable. Let's see, if I think about a case that involved a couple that was living together, and the gentleman owned the home and he deeded half interest in the home to his lover. And then they got married. And after marriage, she decided to contribute a substantial amount of money to the improvements in the home. Well, the improvements might have even exceeded what could be recouped in the event it was sold. Well, even though she owned then, he had given her half of the home, the amount of money that she invested in the improvements she might have not recovered from the sale. So they executed a postnup that said, hey, we are going to partition our income, and husband, you're going to sign a note to me that says, in the event I don't get all of my money back from the home that we just divided, you're going to owe me some money from that. That would not have happened otherwise. So that's an example of a very simple example of, why someone, a couple might want a partition agreement or a postnuptial agreement. Again, it can also be for estate planning, or if someone decides to start a business and they don't want to create a community property interest, they might need to partition their community property in such a way that provides for only one of those parties owning that business. It can get postnuptial agreements or partition agreements in Texas get complicated very quickly. And that's why I'm a much bigger fan of prenuptial agreements, to try to arrange all of these sorts of things before you get married instead of trying to back into something, because it becomes incredibly complex the way our laws are written in Texas.
Cindy, that was wonderful information. So the takeaway is to listen to a previous interview we did with you on what prenuptial agreements are. And then, of course, this is a wonderful follow-up for postnuptial agreements by the words of wisdom of Cindy Hyde in Houston, Texas, and HoustonPrenupAttorney.com to get more information. And I thank you so much for being our guest today on Manousso Musing. Thank you, Cindy Hyde.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Really, very enjoyable.